the Android Guys podcast. I'm here as always with John. Hello, John.
Hello, Scott.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well today. How about yourself?
I'm doing awesome.
Good.
I want to talk to you about Android Go, if you don't mind.
Awesome. I think that sounds real fun.
So this is something that we don't necessarily use as basically, we live in the US. We have tier 1 cell phone providers. We have access to pretty much any phone we want, any carrier. Like, we have a lot of choice. We are not a, so-called third world country or an emerging market or a country that's just now getting into mobile.
That mobile space. Yeah.
So Android Go is something that we may never really have to encounter or need to encounter, but I wanted to talk about it anyways, because there are definitely people who listen to the show who may be interested in or may not understand what Android Go is. So I figured we'd just take a few minutes and do that.
Yeah, that sounds good. I've heard of Android Go. I've seen some of the devices that are Android Go compatible, and I've also seen some of the apps pop up that I've seen on the Play Store to see, what are these things? These are designated. So, I'd like to hear a little bit more about it and maybe offer a little bit what I do know.
Yeah, so this is something that was introduced maybe a little over a year ago, year and a half, depending on when you're listening to this episode. But this is designed, it's a specific version of Android that launched with Android 8.1 Oreo. So it was initially known as Android Go or Android Oreo Go Edition. And it's designed for devices that just are not robust, powerful experiences. I mean, we take for granted what even an entry-level phone for us has. We look at phones now that have 6-8 gigabytes of memory routinely at the middle and top end of the smartphone space. And even at the low end now, you're looking at phones that have 2, 3, 4 gigabytes.
Yeah.
But there are people who only have access to phones that, and they're brand new, that only have 1 gigabyte of memory or may only have 8 gigabytes of storage, when a lot of the phones that we have are 32, 64, 128.
And expandable. Right.
So Android Go is designed specifically for these phones. It is a stripped down, lean, clean version of Android that is designed for low-end hardware. In other words, you shouldn't see a degradation in performance. It's not like you're taking this full, robust version of Android and saying, here, run this with this, outdated or less than powerful enough hardware.
So this really gives the ability to have a cheaper to produce hardware, because now we are at the point where the manufacturers are creating high spec hardware to dial that back, produce a low end, much less expensive unit, but then to simultaneously pull back the code base of Android so it's not so heavy that it can actually be used together to still create a feature rich kind of experience.
Exactly.
That somebody can use regardless of where they're at.
I mean, to think about what we do with our phones as a communication tool for just for messaging, that's a big thing. For dialing and receiving calls, that's somewhat. But then we use it for other things like games and getting online and social media and browsing the internet, doing all these things where there are people on the planet still who are just happy to be able to call somebody in another part of town or the world, or to have access to information, just to get on and have access to Google and Chrome and just to be able to do things that we take for granted. So they don't care about how much memory, and they don't need it. It's a case of, this is filling a need more so than a want.
Well, yeah, I can imagine in some of those emerging markets, the infrastructure for data speeds aren't nearly what we're seeing here. So being able to stream real-time video or being able to play online games, right? The infrastructure is not there, which reduces the need for the performance in the first place. So they could use a device that maybe kind of fits those basic phone functions,
right?
But it still does those very well.
And that's something that, maybe the needle moves over time for Android Go. Like it's for devices with 1 gigabyte of RAM or less. So there are actually Android Go phones that have 512. And if you think back, you're looking all the way back to like the Nexus 1. You're going back nearly a decade for devices that were, when that was the top of the line. So we're completely beyond that. But for a lot of people, they're just now getting access to smartphones. They're just now there are people who their first access of internet comes from a phone and not an actual computer.
Right.
And being able to communicate and to do different things. And what's amazing is that doesn't mean these people are stupid or these people are poor. It's just that it's where they live. That's just that's
the infrastructure, right? It hasn't been built yet. And I think it is from one of the things to me that really I think was so great about this, I don't want to say project, but just this feature and function and availability is it does really give access to information to people groups who have not been able to have access before, because it really wasn't possible. And also to be able to understand how your phone is functioning, like you have in here, like the battery usage and the mobile data and how much storage is being used, having those in the forefront to know this is very clear of how much data I'm using. So I know in the country that I'm at, what my data speeds and my pricing plans are. I can manage that and take care of that.
Right. So with these phones, they're going to have maybe 8 gigabytes of storage, 16 gigabytes, I think is what I've seen kind of on the most devices right now. And as part of that, Android can't take up as much space. If you install Android, Nougat, Oreo, Pie, on a traditional full build on a regular phone that we have, it takes up a lot more than, it's going to eat up your entire 8 gigabytes or more.
Right.
And then you start to put in your games and your apps and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So
I've had some older devices with 16 gigs, and honestly, most of them I just wiped them and trashed them because there wasn't enough space to really use them because of the size of the OS and the apps.
Well, yeah, you think, I'm going to pass this phone down to my kids so they can play games. Well, what games can they put on it? What game?
Right.
Like, there's no expandable storage.
Yep.
Here, you have...
Here's a nice brick.
Yeah, Daddy got you a camera.
Right, exactly.
So as part of Android Go, that's built not only as a more refined or leaner version, but it also kind of gives you more insight into things, as you mentioned, what's using the battery, what's using your data, how much of your storage is being used. And, data, they're going to be very aware of what their plans are, how much they have. And this is stuff that wasn't built into Android initially when we had it, from version, point whatever, before Cupcake.
Right.
So we didn't see that for years. So for these people, it's great. It gives them that knowledge. It gives them that power to understand what their device is. They're using it as tools primarily, and this is information. There are apps that are designed for Android Go, as you mentioned in the Play Store. Google makes a handful of them. They've got Google Go, Google Assistant Go, YouTube, their keyboard, the Gboard Go, even the Play Store, Chrome. A lot of the main apps that Google provides are available in Go versions. There's Files Go, which actually I installed.
Oh, right.
On my phone.
Yes.
Because I thought it was helpful. And, would say, hey, you haven't run this app in so long. Do you want to remove it? Do you, so that was kind of like, that launched kind of just ahead of the whole Android Go So you don't have to have an Android Go device to install some of these things. And some of the differences, you're going to find, hey, this is YouTube. This is the full version of whatever. There may be some things that are not available. Obviously you're not going to use it for broadcasting a live stream.
Right. Some of the features may be a little leaner, a little lighter weight, but the core functionality of watching videos is there. Right.
So it's definitely not saying, hey, we're just going to give you this barely smart device that it just gives you a screen. It's a full smart platform.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something that I think people should be aware of. If you're considering a phone and you're like, oh man, I don't have the money to drop $400, $500, $1,000 for, something that's considered a flagship. There are phones that you'll get often under $100. And rightfully so, the hardware isn't on par with these, but you don't have to buy a 4-year-old phone or get your hands on something that's been passed around for 3 or 4 years just so that you can install that on there. You can buy it brand new out of the box. You can get them from Samsung, Nokia, Alcatel, Blue, Xiaomi. There's a lot of different brands that are manufacturing devices specifically with this version of Android. So it is not secondhand hardware. It might be things that you look at and say, "Oh, I could never run something like that." But there are a lot of people who are going to say, "Hey, man, $100? This is all the hardware I need." And you can buy these phones in the U.S. You don't have to live in a different country or a different market to say, "Well, I don't have access." I mean, you can buy these phones, and for people if you think about grandma's first smartphone or your kid's first smartphone.
That you can, like it limits it to just 4 apps running at one time.
Right.
Like I feel that same way for folks who just need a phone, regardless of locality. That is amazing to say, hey, here's your phone, and not because, not understanding, if I do too much, this thing's going to bog down or this is going to cause problems.
Right.
And to be able to have like a kind of these leaner versions of the apps, that's not entirely a bad thing for probably a decent portion of the population.
Not at all. And it's the right price for people who have got young kids, and I don't want to drop a couple $100 on a phone because all that's available is, these 180 on up here in the US because I'm buying it outright or unlocked, or I'm going through a carrier and kind of paying a little bit every month. Like,
right.
Hey, for less than $100, you can have a phone. And it's got Android, and it's not something they're not going to go off and running. And you can start to educate people. Hey, how much data are you using? What apps are you using? You can start to build and model good usage and responsible smartphone habits, really.
Yeah. Right.
So Android Go is definitely something that I don't see it as a one-off experiment from Google. I think it's something that is interesting. I mean, they're doing it now with Pi. They've continued that on. So it isn't like it was just what was available in 2018, but you're going to continue to see devices manufactured specifically for that. So it's not something that you or I are going to, we can't just say, I'm going to switch over to Android Go and use it as my daily driver. You would obviously go mad over some of the things that you can't do with it. But for other people, definitely consider that. If you've ever seen Android Go or Android Oreo Go Edition, Android 9 Pi Go Edition, anything like that, that's kind of what you're looking at. So that's all I've got. John, anything else you wanted to add here?
That's it. I think it does make sense for us to take a look at that for some maybe, right, you said like aging parents, grandparents, maybe some other folks who maybe, younger children who you may want to have a phone, but you don't want to drop the extra cash on, especially if you don't know how well it's going to be received.
Right.
I think there's a really good use case in this, both locally and to let folks know abroad, that these things are available, and it's a really good solution, I think, to a problem or a hole, at least, that there was there.
You did bring up something here that I'll just add at the very end. If you're considering a phone as a replacement for a kid, well, I'll just get this one. It's only $80. It's got Android Go on it. It's Android. you have to understand that there are going to be limitations on that. So it may be a Band-Aid that works, but you may find, hey, this thing stinks, man. I can't do anything that I wanted to do. So keep that in mind too. If you're going to replace a device, and this runs Android Oreo, I thought that was one of the more recent ones. Well, if you're going with the Go edition, especially here in the US, you might see a difference between performance, even if you're replacing an old phone. So I think we're done.
I think so. Thanks, cool. Scott.
Yeah, no problem. If this is your first time listening to the Android Guys podcast, my name is Scott, and this was John. We would appreciate if you left us feedback or comments, shot us an email. You can do that at podcast@AndroidGuys.com. Subscribe. You can find us pretty much anywhere you would normally get your podcasts. We're willing to bet you found us either Google Play, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever. We would appreciate if you subscribed and shared it. If you found this information helpful, that's what we try to do, is provide weekly, roughly episodes, just kind of educate people in the smartphone space as to what's going on, what's available, and maybe how to get more out of their devices. So for John, this is Scott. Talk to you guys later.